The morning Marcus Vale signed the divorce papers, he told his best friend it was the best decision he had ever made. He said it while standing in the lobby of his own building, Vale Technologies headquarters, 42nd floor, a glass tower in downtown Seattle. He said it loud enough that 2 employees passing through the lobby could hear him. "I've been running this company half distracted for 3 years," he said. "Now I can actually focus." His friend laughed. His employees smiled politely and kept walking. Marcus did not notice what those 2 employees did next. They looked at each other. Not in celebration. Not in agreement. In the particular silence of people who know something the person speaking does not. The divorce had been finalized earlier that morning on the 41st floor of a law office 6 blocks away. Marcus had arrived 7 minutes early, wearing a charcoal suit he purchased the week before, not because he needed a new suit, but because this occasion called for one. Like closing a deal. Like the first day of something better. The conference room smelled of leather and cool recycled air. Outside, Puget Sound stretched beneath a pale gray October sky. Ferries crossed the water slowly. Marcus sat at the head of the table and waited. He had nothing to rehearse. He had made his decision months ago and had been sleeping better ever since. Serena arrived 4 minutes later. She wore a simple cream blouse. No jewelry. Hair pulled back. She set her bag on the table without ceremony and sat across from him without looking up. Marcus studied her the way he always studied things he no longer found useful. Briefly. Dismissively. Their attorney opened the folder. Both parties have signed the preliminary agreements. This final signature concludes the dissolution. Marcus picked up the pen immediately. He signed his name the way he signed everything, fast, clean, final. Then he pushed the papers toward her. Serena lowered her eyes to the document. She was still for a moment that lasted slightly too long. Not because she was hesitating. The stillness was something else, the kind that belongs to a person who has already made peace with an outcome that the other person in the room does not yet understand. Then she picked up the pen and signed. The attorney gathered the pages. That completes the process. Marcus stood. Straightened his jacket. "I think this is the right call for both of us," he said. Serena looked at him for the first time since entering the room. Her expression was not broken. It was not bitter. It was something quieter than both of those things. "I know you do," she said. Marcus waited. She offered nothing more. He nodded once, picked up his briefcase, and walked out. In the elevator on the way down, he exhaled slowly. It was done. He was free. The next chapter was already beginning. What he did not know was that Serena remained in that conference room for 3 more minutes after he left. Not because she was grieving. Because she was making a phone call. The person she called was her older brother, Reeve. "It's done," she said. A pause. "Then, when are you coming home?" Serena looked out the window at the gray Seattle skyline, a city she had arrived in with a quiet excitement 7 years ago, believing in a person and a life she was building together with him. "Thursday," she said. "Tell father I am ready." She ended the call, gathered her bag, and walked out of the room with the same composure she had walked in with. At the front desk of the law office, a young receptionist told her it was raining outside and offered an umbrella. Serena smiled and declined. Outside, the rain came down in cold, steady sheets. She walked half a block before she stopped. Not because of the rain. She stopped because something moved through her chest without warning, sudden and heavy, the way grief arrives when you have been keeping it at arm's length long enough that you forget it is still there. 7 years. She had given 7 years to a city she had not chosen, a life she had built around someone else's dream, and a version of herself she had made deliberately smaller so that he would not feel the difference between them. 7 years of early mornings and quiet sacrifices and sentences she never finished because she could see he had already stopped listening. She stood on the sidewalk in the rain. A woman passing with a stroller glanced at her briefly, then looked away in the polite way strangers do when they sense they are witnessing something private. Serena felt the tears arrive at the back of her throat. She let them get that far. And then she stopped them. Not because she was ashamed of them. Not because she believed she had no right to them. But because she understood, standing there in the cold October rain on a sidewalk in Seattle, that if she started crying now, for him, for the years, for the version of herself she had slowly surrendered, she might not stop. And she had somewhere to be. She exhaled slowly. She straightened. She walked the rest of the way to the taxi stand without looking back at the building behind her. She had learned a long time ago how to walk through storms without shelter. What she was still learning was that sometimes the storm had been inside the building all along. Here is what Marcus Vale believed about himself. He believed he had built Vale Technologies from nothing. 12 people in a rented office. A product that 3 enterprise clients rejected before a 4th gave him a chance. 6 years of grinding, pitching, pivoting, and refusing to fail. He believed the company was his. His vision. His execution. His success. And in many ways, that was true. But there is a version of truth that leaves things out. And the version Marcus told himself left out almost everything that actually mattered. For years earlier, Serena had come to him quietly one evening while he was preparing for the most important investor presentation of his career. He was going to lose it. He didn't know it yet. But Serena had spent 2 hours reading through the proposal documents he left on the kitchen table, and she saw the problem immediately. The growth projections were reasonable. The technology was strong. But the regulatory compliance section contained a structural gap that any experienced investor counsel would catch and cite as grounds to walk away. It was nearly midnight. Serena sat across from him at the kitchen table with a legal pad and said, "I need you to listen to me for 20 minutes. Marcus looked up from his laptop. He had been awake for 19 hours. He was exhausted and confident in the way exhausted people sometimes become. "Serena, I've been over this 100 times. "I know," she said. "And you missed something." He almost dismissed her. He came within 2 seconds of saying something that would have ended that conversation and sent him into that presentation with a document that would have cost him the company. Instead, something in her voice made him stop. He listened. By 2 in the morning, they had rebuilt the compliance section entirely. Serena drafted the revised language from memory, citing frameworks she recalled from a regulatory brief she had read 6 months earlier for a completely different reason. Marcus went into that presentation and closed the deal. The next morning, in a celebratory call with his board, he said, "I stayed up half the night overhauling the risk framework." That's the kind of detail that separates us. Serena was in the next room. She heard every word. She set down her coffee cup and looked out the window. And she told herself it didn't matter who got the credit. She told herself that a partnership didn't need an audience. She was wrong. And she would spend 3 more years paying the price of that belief before she finally walked away. That was not the only time. There was the Hartfield Group partnership, Vale Technologies' second largest account, which existed entirely because Serena called in a quiet favor from an industry connection she had cultivated years before she ever met Marcus. She never explained where the introduction came from. She simply made it happen. There was the internal crisis in year 3, when a senior product manager threatened to take half the engineering team to a competitor. Serena spent for private conversations over 2 weeks understanding what the man actually needed. Equity restructuring. A title adjustment. A sense that his contribution was real. She presented the solution to Marcus, who implemented it and told his board he had handled a near mutiny with precision. There was the acquisition offer in year 4 that would have sold the company for less than it was worth. Serena read the term sheet in one sitting, identified 3 buried clauses that would have transferred licensing rights permanently, and told Marcus to walk away. He almost didn't. But he walked. None of these moments appeared in any interview he ever gave. None of them appeared in the company history he told at conference panels. None of them existed in his version of events. But they existed. And the company existed because of them. There was one more thing. The kind that does not appear in any financial report or legal document but lives longer in the body than any of the others. It was a Thursday evening in November, 2 years into the marriage. Their anniversary. Serena had made a reservation at a restaurant they had talked about for months, a small Italian place in Capitol Hill that required a 6-week wait. She had confirmed it twice. She had bought a dress she told no one about. She had left the office 2 hours early, which she never did. She was home by 6. Table was at 7:30. Marcus called at 6:45. There was an emergency. A lender had questions about a covenant structure in their newest credit facility. The legal team needed him on a call in 20 minutes and the call would run long. Serena stood in the kitchen in her dress, holding the phone. "How long?" she asked. "I don't know." "A few hours. Maybe more." A pause. "I'm sorry," he said. And to his credit, he probably was. In the moment. "Okay," she said quietly. She hung up. She changed out of the dress. She cancelled the reservation. Then she sat down at the kitchen table with her laptop because there was nothing else to do, and she pulled up the credit facility documents Marcus's team had been working on. She had seen them on his desk that morning, and within 40 minutes she had found the covenant issue and drafted a note explaining 3 possible resolutions. She emailed it to him without telling him how she had spent the previous 40 minutes. The call that was supposed to run several hours ended in 90 minutes. Marcus came home after 10 o'clock and said the legal team had figured it out. Serena was already in bed. "Did they?" she said to the ceiling. "Yeah." Turned out it wasn't as complicated as they thought. She did not answer. He fell asleep in minutes. Serena lay in the dark and reached up slowly and removed her earrings, the one she had put on for the dinner that never happened, and set them on the nightstand. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. She told herself she was being too sensitive. She told herself this was what it meant to build something together. Sacrifices. Timing. Delayed dinners and rescheduled celebrations. She told herself it was fine. She was wrong about that too. 3 weeks after the divorce, Marcus gave an interview to a Pacific Northwest business publication. The journalist asked him how he had built such strong enterprise relationships in a competitive market. Marcus leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Honestly? I think it comes down to trust. People trust me because I'm consistent. I show up. I follow through. I've always understood that relationships are the real product." The journalist nodded and wrote it down. That evening, the article was published online. Serena's brother forwarded it to her without comment. She read the line about relationships being the real product. She set her phone down. Then she opened her laptop and sent an email that would, in 4 months, change the direction of an entire industry sector. But she did not think about Marcus while she typed it. She was already thinking about something much larger. The Caldwell-Harte family did not advertise their wealth. No magazine profiles. No social media presence. No charity galas with photographers positioned at the entrance. Their name appeared in regulatory filings and private financial disclosures, occasionally in academic case studies on multi-generational capital preservation. Caldwell-Harte Capital managed assets across infrastructure, financial services, biotechnology, and emerging technology markets. The family's combined holdings had not been built in one generation or through one industry. They had been constructed across decades the way serious things are always constructed, slowly, carefully, without announcing themselves. Serena was the youngest of 3. The only one who had ever left. She had not left because she was ungrateful. She left because she needed to know whether she was capable on her own terms, without the inheritance of her family's name doing the work for her. What she discovered was that she was more than capable. She was exceptional. She had built a consulting firm under a professional name with no family connection. Grown it through referrals and results alone. Advised companies on operational strategy with a precision that surprised people who expected someone her age to still be learning. She had also, in the process of that work, met Marcus Vale at an industry event in San Francisco, and made the decision, the one she would spend years quietly regretting, to set her own ambitions aside temporarily and invest herself in his. She had believed they were partners. He had believed she was support staff. The difference between those two beliefs had taken 6 years to fully surface. Now it was fully surfaced. And Serena was home. Gerald Caldwell-Harte's private office in the Greenwich estate had not changed since Serena was a teenager. Same bookshelves. Same framed industry awards from 3 decades earlier that he kept not out of vanity but because he believed in remembering where things came from. Same large windows overlooking the Eastern Garden. He was 72 now, but he carried himself like a man who had decided that age was not a reason to slow down before the work was finished. He stood when Serena entered. "You look like someone who has been carrying something too heavy for too long," he said. Serena sat across from him. "I'm fine." Gerald studied her for a moment in the way he studied everything, without rushing to a conclusion. Then he reached into the drawer beside him and slid a folder across the desk. Serena opened it. A board resolution. Dated 11 days ago. Her name, listed as the incoming Chief Strategic Officer of Caldwell-Harte Capital, pending formal acceptance. She looked up. "We anticipated your answer would eventually be yes," Gerald said. "We simply could not know when." Serena stared at the document. Her throat tightened slightly in the way it does when something you stopped allowing yourself to want suddenly becomes real. "Why me?" she asked. "Reeve has more operational experience." Gerald folded his hands. "Reeve knows how to manage what already exists." He nodded toward the folder. "We need someone who knows how to see what is about to fail before anyone else does." He paused. "That is not a skill you can teach. You either have it or you don't." He looked at his daughter steadily. "You have always had it. You simply spent several years using it for someone who did not deserve it." Serena was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed the folder. "When do I start?" Gerald almost smiled. "You started the moment you walked in." Meanwhile, in Seattle, Marcus Vale's best chapter was not going the way he had planned. The first signs arrived quietly, as the worst things usually do. A phone call from Hartfield Group that should have been routine felt off. Too many questions about account continuity. Too much interest in understanding who would be managing the relationship going forward. Marcus assigned the account to his new director of enterprise partnerships, a sharp and experienced man named Preston Cole who had impressive credentials and an excellent track record. Hartfield Group gave it 60 days. Then they terminated the contract. No drama. No complaints. A brief email citing a desire to consolidate their technology vendor relationships. 60 days later, they announced a new partnership. With Albridge Systems. Marcus sat in his office reading the press release with the particular stillness of a man who is beginning to understand that something is wrong but cannot yet identify what. He called Hartfield Group's director of operations directly. The man was polite. Warm, even. But there was a careful quality to everything he said that had not been there 2 years ago. "We have a lot of respect for what you've built," the man said. "The timing just worked out differently." Marcus hung up and stared at the wall. Preston Cole knocked on the open door. "I just got off the phone with the Callaway Group," he said. "They're pushing our renewal discussion to Q2. Marcus looked at him. "Why?" Preston hesitated. "They said they wanted more time to evaluate the relationship." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "We've had their account for 4 years. What relationship is there to evaluate?" Preston said nothing. But the silence had a shape to it. The memory came to Marcus at 2 o'clock in the morning 3 weeks later, while he sat alone in his home office reviewing a financial summary that had too many red indicators. He remembered something Serena had said once, 3 years ago, after a dinner with the Hartfield Group's founder. They had driven home in the quiet that follows a long evening, and Serena had said, almost to herself, he trusts process, but what he actually responds to is continuity. He needs to know the same person will be there next year as this year. If that changes, he will find someone else. Marcus had said something like or possibly nothing. He had been thinking about something else. Now, sitting alone at 2 in the morning, he thought about that sentence. He thought about how many of his client relationships had been built through Serena's conversations, Serena's introductions, Serena's careful, patient attention to the human beings behind the contracts. He thought about how many of those people called her by her first name without being prompted. He thought about how many of those people had probably heard about the divorce, had noticed her absence, had made quiet decisions without saying anything at all to Marcus directly. The financial summary on his screen suddenly looked very different. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a long time. By March, the pattern was undeniable. For major client accounts had reduced their contracts or initiated exit discussions. 2 investors had delayed renewal conversations that had previously been automatic. A senior product executive had resigned to join Albridge Systems. The board requested an emergency strategy session. Marcus stood at the front of the conference room in front of 7 people who had once trusted him without reservation. He presented a recovery plan, restructured pricing, accelerated timelines, a new client outreach initiative. He spoke for 30 minutes. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then Clifford Ashe, a board member in his 60s who had invested in the company's Series A and had spoken perhaps 40 sentences in 6 years of board meetings, raised his hand slowly. "Marcus," he said. "Of the accounts we've lost or are at risk of losing in the past for months, how many of those relationships were managed primarily by Serena?" The room temperature dropped 3 degrees. Marcus answered the question accurately, because there was no version of the answer that helped him, and so honesty was the only remaining option. 4 of the 6. Clifford nodded slowly. "And who manages those relationships now?" Silence. That silence was its own answer. The West Coast Infrastructure Forum took place every year at a private conference center outside Portland. It was the kind of event where the conversations in hallways mattered more than the panels in the main room, where attendance was a statement and absence was a rumor. Marcus attended because his board strongly suggested he should. He arrived needing to project stability, to remind the industry that Vale Technologies was navigating a difficult quarter but was not in distress. He walked in with his chief financial officer and 2 senior executives and immediately understood that projecting stability was going to be more difficult than he planned. People greeted him, shook his hand, asked the careful questions that people ask when they have already decided something but are not yet ready to say it. One investor, a man named Gordon Trask who had been publicly enthusiastic about Vale Technologies for 3 years, spent less than 90 seconds with Marcus before excusing himself. Marcus watched him walk across the room toward someone else. Then he saw who that someone else was. And everything in his chest compressed at once. Serena was standing near the far end of the reception hall. She wore a dark navy blazer over a simple ivory blouse. No statement jewelry. Nothing designed to perform wealth or authority. She didn't need any of it. Because the performance was happening around her, not from her. Gordon Trask was shaking her hand warmly. 2 other executives Marcus recognized from industry publications were already waiting nearby to speak with her. A woman who led one of the largest infrastructure investment funds in the Pacific Northwest crossed the room specifically to reach her. Marcus stood completely still. His CFO appeared at his shoulder. "Did you know she would be here?" Marcus did not answer. "She's representing Caldwell-Harte Capital," the CFO said. "They're launching a technology infrastructure initiative. She's leading it." A pause. "Caldwell-Harte Capital." Marcus turned to look at him. "What?" The CFO looked surprised. "You didn't know?" "Serena Caldwell-Harte. Her family runs Caldwell-Harte Capital, one of the largest private investment firms in the country." He paused. The Hartfield Group's primary private equity relationship is through a Caldwell-Harte affiliate fund. The room felt like it tilted slightly. Marcus turned toward the far wall. A digital display cycled through the evening's featured speakers and organizational partners. Clean white text on a dark background. Simple. Authoritative. He watched it rotate. Then it stopped. Caldwell-Harte Capital. Technology Infrastructure Initiative. And beneath it? Serena Caldwell-Harte, Chief Strategic Officer. He stared at that screen for a long time. 6 years. 6 years she had sat across from him at kitchen tables and board dinners and weekend breakfasts. 6 years he had introduced her to rooms full of powerful people simply as his wife, never as someone carrying a name that had been quietly opening doors his ambition alone could never reach. Chief Strategic Officer. Caldwell-Harte Capital. The same family name that appeared in the founding documents of 3 institutions Marcus had spent years trying to get meetings with. The woman he had called a distraction. Out loud. In his own lobby. The morning of the divorce. Marcus looked back across the hall. He watched Gordon Trask laugh at something Serena said, genuinely, the way people laugh when they are completely at ease. He watched the infrastructure fund director touch her arm briefly, a gesture of warmth that usually took years to earn. He watched the woman he had dismissed receive more real professional respect in 4 minutes than he had accumulated in the entire evening. He set down his drink. He walked across the room before he had decided to. Serena saw him coming from 20 feet away. She excused herself from the conversation and turned to face him with the same composure she had carried into the law office 3 months ago. Marcus. He stopped. He looked at her for a moment. She looked different to him, and then he understood that she did not actually look different. She looked like herself. He simply had never seen that before because she had been managing herself smaller, for years, so that he did not feel the gap between them. I didn't know you'd be here, he said. I assumed you would be. A pause. Can we go somewhere quieter? They moved through a side door onto a small stone terrace overlooking a courtyard of Douglas firs lit from below. Portland cold. The sound of the reception reduced to a murmur behind them. Marcus put his hands in his pockets. I've been trying to figure out where everything went wrong. Serena waited. I thought losing clients was a market problem. A competition problem. He looked at the trees. It wasn't. No, she said. It wasn't. He exhaled slowly. How many of those relationships were actually yours? Serena considered the question. Define yours. You know what I mean. I do, she said. But I want you to hear the question back. Because it's the wrong one. She turned to face him directly. The relationships were not mine and they were not yours. They were built on trust. Accumulated, slowly, over years. And trust doesn't transfer automatically when the person who built it is gone. Marcus looked down. I told myself you were there because of me, he said. Because I had built something worth being part of. I know. I told a journalist that I understood relationships were the real product. Serena almost smiled, but the smile did not make it all the way. I read that. I meant it when I said it. He looked at her. I just didn't understand what it actually meant. She studied him. His expression carried something she had not seen on him in years. Not performance. Not positioning. Just a man looking at the cost of his own blindness. Is there any version of this where we could start over? He asked. Serena was quiet for a moment. Not because she was considering it. Because she wanted to answer him honestly rather than quickly. No, she said. There isn't. He swallowed. I thought you would say that. Marcus. She waited until he looked at her. You didn't lose your company because of the divorce. You lost it because for 6 years, you let someone hold the whole thing together and never once asked how she was doing it. She paused. That problem existed long before I left. He had no answer for that. She stepped back toward the door. He said it quietly, almost to himself. You were the most important thing in that building. And I never said it once. Serena stopped. She did not turn around. I didn't destroy you, Marcus, she said. A pause. I only stopped holding you up. Then she walked back inside. She did not look back. She did not need to. The board removed Marcus from the CEO position 6 weeks after the Portland conference. It was not dramatic. No emergency press release. No shouting. A formal board resolution, delivered in a morning meeting in the same conference room where he had once stood to celebrate the company's best year. He retained a small equity stake. An advisory role that carried no actual authority. He sat in his car in the parking garage for 40 minutes after the meeting ended. He did not make any calls. He did not check his phone. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel and stared at the concrete wall in front of him. He thought about the morning of the divorce, 6 months earlier. The charcoal suit. The lobby. His friend laughing. The 2 employees who had looked at each other in silence. He understood now what that silence meant. He drove downtown. He did not intend to go to the building. He found himself there anyway, parked across the street, engine idling, looking up at the glass tower that still had his name on it. For now. A crew arrived at 9:15 in the morning. 3 men in grey work clothes, carrying equipment. They rode the elevator to the lobby. Marcus watched through his windshield as they set up a scaffolding unit beside the main entrance. The Vale Technologies name had been mounted on the interior lobby wall in raised steel letters, each one nearly a foot tall. They had gone up 6 years ago. Marcus had been there for that too. He had photographed it and posted it himself. The first letter came down at 9:22. Then the second. Then the third. Marcus watched until all of it was gone and the wall was blank. Then he drove to a coffee shop near the waterfront, ordered a black coffee, and sat alone at a corner table and looked out at the water for a long time. At some point he took out a pen and a legal pad from his bag. Not a business plan. Not a pitch deck. A list. Of everyone he had failed to credit. Everyone whose contribution had been folded into his story without acknowledgement. Everyone who had made something possible that he had then claimed entirely as his own. It was a long list. Serena's name was at the top. He wrote it carefully. First name. Last name. Full. He sat with it for a while. He did not send her the list. He did not contact her. He understood, perhaps for the first time with full clarity, that some debts cannot be repaid. They can only be carried forward into the life you build next, so you do not make the same mistake twice. In Manhattan, on a Tuesday morning in April, Serena Caldwell-Harte sat at the head of a conference table on the 38th floor of the Caldwell-Harte Capital offices. 12 people sat around the table. Division heads, senior partners, external advisors. People who had spent their careers in rooms that shaped industries. They were there to hear her. She presented the Caldwell-Harte Technology Infrastructure Initiative, a 3-year, multi-sector investment strategy she had designed over the previous 2 months. Clean. Precise. Built on relationships she had cultivated across a decade and a half of work that most of those relationships never associated with the Caldwell-Harte name. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Gerald Caldwell-Harte, who was seated at the far end of the table and had not spoken during the entire presentation, said simply, "Approved." People around the table nodded. Conversations began. The room came alive with the particular energy of a plan that everyone in it already believed in. Reeve appeared in the doorway afterward. "The Halcyon Group confirmed," he said. "They're moving forward." Serena nodded. Reeve studied her for a moment. "You know, there were people on this board 5 years ago who thought you were too quiet to lead something like this." Serena looked at him. "What do they think now?" Reeve smiled. "That quiet was never the same thing as small. After everyone left, Serena stood alone at the window. A thin rain had begun tapping against the glass. She looked at it for a moment. And without meaning to, she was back on a Seattle sidewalk. October cold. The rain coming down in steady sheets. The law office 6 blocks behind her. 7 years of her life reduced to a signature and a man exhaling with relief in an elevator. She remembered the exact feeling. The grief arriving without warning. The tears that reached her throat and stopped. The choice she made, to straighten, to breathe, to keep walking, not because she was strong enough not to cry, but because she understood that if she started she might not stop. She had kept that promise to herself for months. Through the flight to New York. Through her father's study and the board resolution and the first 100 days of learning how to stop making herself smaller. She had kept going. And now she was here. Standing at a window 38 floors above Manhattan while rain tapped against the glass. This time she did not hold anything back. She smiled. Not a performance. Not a statement. A quiet, private smile, the kind that belongs entirely to yourself when you realize you have finally stopped surviving inside someone else's life and started living inside your own. The Hudson River caught the morning light below. Across the water, the skyline of New Jersey stretched in both directions. Somewhere beyond it, across 3,000 miles of American geography, a man was sitting in a smaller apartment than the one he used to own, rebuilding something that had collapsed under the weight of his own misunderstanding. She did not feel victorious. She did not feel bitter. She felt something quieter. Something that took her a moment to identify because she had not felt it in so long she had almost forgotten it had a name. She felt like herself. After years of being reduced, by someone else's limitations, by her own willingness to accommodate them, she had finally stopped making herself easier to be around. She had not become harder. She had simply become complete. And she thought, briefly, about the woman who had sat in a law office in Seattle on a cold October morning and signed her name in 3 seconds while a man who never understood her exhaled with relief. She had not destroyed that man. She had only stopped holding him up. And sometimes, she understood now, that is the most powerful thing a woman can do. Not revenge. Not retaliation. Just the simple, devastating act of finally putting down something that was never hers to carry.